My parents put me in foster care when I was 6 years old. They kept my twin sister. My mother told the social worker that I was the difficult one and that my sister had a future. For years, they told everyone I ran away. Decades later, they saw me on national television. Suddenly, they wanted me back. I smiled and said, "Of course, meet the woman who raised me." When she walked in wearing her Child Protective Services badge, my mother dropped her glass in pure horror. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who threw you away. The studio lights of The Truth Unveiled were blindingly bright. I stood center stage in my tailored crimson suit, projecting the exact brand of authority that had made my investigative journalism show a primetime powerhouse. We were broadcasting live to 15 million viewers across the country, honoring grassroots social activists who had fought against systemic corruption. I had just finished interviewing a woman who exposed a massive corporate fraud ring, and the studio audience was on their feet delivering a standing ovation. I held my microphone steady, waiting for the applause to naturally fade. I thrived in this environment. Here, under the heavy camera rigs and the countdown clocks, I was in absolute control. Every question I asked, every silence I let linger, was a calculated move to expose the truth. I had built this media empire from nothing, using the very resilience my biological family had forced me to develop when they discarded me. I was 31 years old and at the absolute peak of my career. Then my meticulously controlled environment shattered. A sudden violent commotion erupted from the left side of the audience seating. The heavy soundproof doors burst open, and my floor director waved his hands frantically trying to signal security. But it was too late. 3 people shoved past the heavy-set security guards and rushed straight down the illuminated aisle toward my stage. Even after 25 years of absolute silence, I recognized them instantly. Age had sharpened their features, but the hungry greed in their eyes remained exactly the same. It was Yvonne and Desmond, the people whose DNA I unfortunately shared. Right behind them, wearing a designer dress she absolutely could not afford, was Serena, my twin sister, the undisputed golden child. Before my security detail could intercept and tackle them to the floor, Yvonne threw herself onto the stage. She collapsed to her knees, grabbing my waist with a theatrical wail that echoed through the entire studio. My microphone picked up the piercing sound, broadcasting it to millions of homes across America. "Oh my God, my baby!" she screamed, her voice cracking with perfectly rehearsed agony. "My beautiful daughter. You were kidnapped 25 years ago from our backyard. We searched until we were bankrupt. We never gave up hope. I have finally found you." The live studio audience gasped in collective shock. The camera operators instantly pivoted, zooming in on this supposed miraculous family reunion. Desmond stood behind his wife, wiping away non-existent tears, playing the role of the stoic, heartbroken father, finally reunited with his lost child. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, a possessive touch that made my skin crawl. But it was Serena who truly mastered the performance. Serena, who I knew had been drowning in debt while trying to maintain a fake luxury influencer lifestyle on social media, made absolutely sure her left side, the side she always considered her good angle, was facing the primary camera crane. She let out a delicate cinematic sob and reached out to hold my free hand. "Sister," she whispered loud enough for the boom mic to catch, "we missed you every single day." I did not pull away. I did not flinch. I did not give them the satisfying reaction of a traumatized victim. I had spent years interviewing corrupt politicians, scheming corporate executives, and ruthless criminals. A trio of greedy relatives looking for a payday was child's play by comparison. I knew exactly what they were doing. They had seen my face on billboards and magazine covers. They had seen my network ratings and my net worth. They knew I was powerful, and they wanted to hijack my platform to build a narrative where they were the tragic heroes. They wanted to force me into playing the grateful rescued daughter on live television, where they assumed I would be too embarrassed to cause a scene. They thought the pressure of 15 million viewers would force me to accept their embrace. They were catastrophically wrong. While the audience murmured in awe at the unfolding drama, I kept my posture rigid and commanding. I looked down at Yvonne, who was still clinging to my blazer and burying her face in the expensive fabric. I could smell her heavy floral perfume, the exact same scent she wore the day she packed my meager belongings into a garbage bag. I smoothly reached up and pressed the mute button on my microphone box, clipping the audio feed to the control room. The audience could only see us now, they could not hear a single word. I leaned down, wrapping my arms around Yvonne in what looked like a tender maternal embrace to the cameras. I put my lips right next to her ear. "Kidnapped," I whispered, my voice dropping to a freezing calm tone. "Is that what we are calling it now? Or was it that legally binding Child Protective Services document you signed? The one where you specifically stated this one is too difficult, just keep the sister who has a future." I felt Yvonne go completely rigid against me. Her theatrical sobbing stopped instantly. Her fingers, which had been tightly gripping my jacket, suddenly went slack. I pulled back just enough to look her directly in the eyes. I kept a bright, warm smile plastered across my face for the millions of viewers watching at home. "Do not stop crying now, Mom," I whispered, keeping my teeth clenched in a flawless smile. "You wanted a show and the cameras are rolling. Keep smiling, because I know Serena and her husband Carter are waiting to capitalize on this, and I know exactly what they are planning." Yvonne stared up at me, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the sheer panic washing over her face. The triumphant gleam in her eyes vanished, replaced by raw terror. She looked at Serena, who was still posing for the cameras, completely unaware that their entire house of cards had just been rigged with explosives. I reached down, unmuted my microphone, and turned to the main camera with absolute precision, ready to burn their fake reality to the ground. The red light on the primary camera blinked off, and the floor director pointed to me, yelling that we were clear for a commercial break. The second the studio audience applause faded beneath the soundproof barrier, my warm smile vanished. I did not wait for Yvonne to recover from the shock of my whisper. I grabbed her firmly by the elbow, my grip tight enough to let her know the performance was over. I grabbed Serena by her thin sequined strap with my other hand and marched them both off the stage before they could utter a single word to the press. Desmond scrambled behind us, trying to keep up his heavy breathing loud over the backstage commotion. I shoved them through the heavy oak doors of my private VIP green room and signaled my head of security to lock it from the outside. "No one gets in," I instructed him. The moment the door clicked shut, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Sitting on the white leather sofa with his legs crossed, casually, was a man I had never met but recognized immediately from my background research. Carter, Serena's husband. He wore a tailored suit that was trying very hard to look expensive, but the slight fraying at the cuffs gave away his actual financial reality. He was a crisis public relations manager who had built a mediocre career by spinning scandals for D-list celebrities. Now he was looking at me like I was his winning lottery ticket. "Bravo, Nadia," Carter said, standing up and giving a slow, sarcastic clap. "That was a beautiful moment out there. The camera loves you. 15 million viewers just watched the reunion of the decade." I ignored him and walked over to the vanity mirror, grabbing a makeup wipe to aggressively clean the spot on my cheek where Yvonne had pressed her fake tears. "I am giving you exactly 2 minutes to explain why you hijacked my live broadcast before I have you all arrested for trespassing," I said, addressing the room through the reflection in the mirror. Yvonne immediately dropped her weeping mother act. She straightened her posture and crossed her arms, looking around the luxurious green room with naked greed in her eyes. "You owe us," she said, her voice losing all its previous warmth. "We gave birth to you. We brought you into this world, and you sit up here in your high tower making millions while your real family struggles." Serena stepped forward, checking her reflection next to mine. She fluffed her hair and pulled out her phone, probably eager to check her social media metrics. "Do not act like you are better than us, Nadia. The whole world just saw how much we love you. If you try to throw us out now, you will look like a monster." Carter stepped between us, playing the role of the reasonable mediator. "Ladies, let us keep this professional." He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers, dropping it onto the glass coffee table with a heavy thud. "This is a media franchise contract, Nadia. An exclusive reality television deal." I turned around, leaning against the vanity counter, and crossed my arms. A reality show, I repeated, my voice flat. Carter smiled, his teeth bright against his pale skin. Exactly. We call it the broadcast of a lifetime. America loves a redemption story. The lost billionaire daughter reunites with her humble, hardworking roots. We document everything: the tears, the healing, the family dinners. My firm will handle all the exclusive press rights. We already have 2 streaming networks ready to start a bidding war. All we need is your signature. And if I refuse? I asked, staring directly into his eyes. Carter's smile did not waver, but his tone turned sharp and calculating. You are a smart woman, Nadia. You understand media narratives. Right now, you are the hero. But if you walk out that door and call security, my PR firm will release a very different story to the press. We will paint you as the cold, heartless billionaire who turned her back on the struggling black family that spent 2 decades searching for her. Desmond finally spoke up, his voice gruff. We will tell them you were a difficult child, that you had violent tendencies, that we had to send you away for treatment and you ran off. People will believe us because people love to hate wealthy women who forget where they came from. Serena smirked, looking up from her phone. My followers are already trending our reunion. If I go live right now and cry about how my wealthy sister kicked our poor parents out into the street, your network shareholders will suspend you by morning. You will lose your show, your endorsements, and your reputation. I looked at the 4 of them. A mother who sold me out of convenience, a father who enabled it, a sister who wanted to steal my spotlight, and a white brother-in-law trying to use our black trauma as a shield to save his failing business. They really thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought my wealth made me soft and my public image made me vulnerable. They had no idea that my entire career was built on dismantling people far more dangerous than them. I walked slowly over to the coffee table. The silence in the room was absolute. I picked up the thick contract, holding it in my hands to feel the weight of their desperate greed. Carter puffed out his chest, clearly believing he had won. You really thought this through, Carter, I said, looking at the legal jargon on the front page. A crisis manager trying to create a crisis so he can bill for managing it. It is a classic move. Just sign the paper, Nadia, Carter said, checking his watch. We have a press conference to get to. I gripped the top of the contract, and in one swift motion, I ripped the thick stack of papers right down the middle. The sound of tearing paper echoed sharply in the quiet room. Yvonne gasped and Serena dropped her phone. I ripped the pages again, tearing their reality show dreams into meaningless shreds, and threw the confetti of paper directly at Carter's chest. The pieces fluttered down, landing on his cheap shoes. What leverage do you actually think you have, Carter? I asked, stepping so close to him that he instinctively took a step back. Do you think I do not do background checks on the people who sleep with my biological sister? Your public relations firm is underwater. You owe the Internal Revenue Service $4 million in back taxes. You are facing federal indictment by the end of the month. Carter's face drained of all color. His confident posture completely collapsed. How do you? He stammered, unable to finish the sentence. I did not stop. And Desmond? I said, turning to my biological father, whose jaw was currently hanging open. You let Carter take out a second mortgage on your house to help pay off his business debts. You put up the very roof over your head to fund his sinking ship because he promised you a cut of this imaginary reality show. Yvonne looked at her husband in horror. You mortgaged the house, she shrieked. I smiled, the same cold smile I gave them on stage. But here's the best part. Carter went through a private equity lender to get that mortgage because no traditional bank would touch his ruined credit. Did he happen to read the name of the parent company that owns that private equity firm? Nobody spoke. The air in the room was thick with sudden, terrifying realization. I own Horizon Holdings, I said, my voice steady and quiet. I am the majority shareholder of the bank that currently holds the deed to your house. So go ahead, Carter. Leak your little story to the press. Tweet your tears, Serena. Because the moment you do, I will call in that loan, and the people who gave birth to me will be out on the street by Friday. You are not holding me hostage. I am holding the keys to your entire existence. I left them standing in the green room, choking on the reality of their own financial ruin. I walked down the sterile hallway of the studio, my heels clicking against the polished floor with the steady rhythm of a metronome. I thought my threat would keep them quiet. I underestimated the sheer reckless desperation of a man backed into a corner. By 6 in the morning, my phone was vibrating off the nightstand. I reached over, pulling the device toward me and squinting at the screen. 50 missed calls, 100 text messages from my producer. My inbox was a sea of red urgent flags. I opened a news app and there it was. Carter had actually done it. He had leaked a video to every major tabloid and gossip blog in the country. But it was not the full video of what happened on stage. It was a viciously edited 15-second clip. It showed only the moment Yvonne lunged at me, but heavily cropped and slowed down to make my defensive posture look like an unprovoked attack. The audio had been manipulated, removing Yvonne's screaming and amplifying the sound of me slapping her hand away. The headline screamed, "Billionaire anchor violently rejects heartbroken mother on live television." Before I could even process the audacity of the smear campaign, a notification popped up for a live stream. It was Serena. Of course it was Serena. She was sitting in what looked like her luxury living room, wearing a simple white sweater and no makeup to maximize the victim aesthetic. She was staring into the camera with her lower lip trembling, squeezing out crocodile tears with practiced perfection. "I just want my sister back," Serena sobbed to her 100,000 viewers, wiping her eyes delicately. "But you all need to know the truth about Nadia. She did not get kidnapped. She ran away because she was out of control. Growing up, she was always violent, always hurting me. I have scars from when we were kids. My parents tried everything to help her. They spent all their money on therapists, but she was just too aggressive. And now seeing her attack our poor mother on television just brings all that childhood trauma rushing back. I am terrified of her, but I forgive her." I watched the viewer count skyrocket. The comments were a blur of absolute hatred directed at me. People were calling for my immediate cancellation, demanding my network fire, the violent sociopath. Carter had orchestrated a masterful hit job, using his wife's fake trauma to trigger a public execution of my character. He thought if he destroyed my public image, I would be forced to sign his reality show contract to salvage my reputation. He thought wrong. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was the chief executive officer of the network. His voice was tight with panic when I answered. "Nadia, you need to get to the boardroom right now. The sponsors are threatening to pull their ads. The shareholders are having a meltdown. We have to suspend you pending an investigation." I did not argue. I simply said I will be there in 20 minutes. I got out of bed, took a cold shower, and dressed in my sharpest charcoal suit. I did not feel fear. I felt a cold, calculating anger that sharpened my focus to a razor edge. When I walked into the executive boardroom, the atmosphere was suffocating. 12 board members sat around the massive mahogany table, looking at me as if I were a live grenade. The chief executive officer stood at the head of the table holding a printed document. "Nadia." He started, his tone heavy with corporate regret. "We love your show, but this scandal is radioactive. Serena is gaining public sympathy by the second. The edited video makes you look like a monster. We have a duty to protect the network. I need you to sign this temporary suspension agreement while the public relations team tries to put out the fire." I walked slowly to the end of the table, ignoring the piece of paper he held out to me. I did not say a word. I pulled my tablet from my briefcase, plugged it directly into the boardroom projector system, and tapped the screen. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls. "You are panicking over a fabricated narrative designed by a man who is currently drowning in federal tax debt. You want to protect the network. So do I. Please direct your attention to the screen." I hit play. The screen illuminated with the raw, unedited, multiple-angle security footage from the studio. It showed exactly what happened before and after the stage stunt. It showed Serena fixing her hair and checking the camera angles before pretending to cry. It showed Yvonne stepping on a producer's foot to aggressively shove her way past security. It showed the entire calculated ambush. The board members leaned forward, their expressions shifting from anger at me to deep confusion. But that was just the appetizer. I swiped to the next slide. This is Carter, the man who leaked the edited footage to the press, I explained, pulling up a series of financial documents. He is my brother-in-law and a crisis manager who is $4 million in debt. But please look closely at these wire transfers. I highlighted 3 specific transactions on the screen. These transfers were made from Carter's shell company to 3 separate offshore bot farms at 2 in the morning. He did not just leak a video. He paid for a coordinated cyber attack against this very network. He paid to have bots flood our sponsors' pages with threats to boycott their products. He engineered a fake crisis to tank your stock so you would panic and force me to settle with him. The boardroom erupted. The chief executive officer dropped the suspension paper onto the table, his face turning a dark shade of purple. He paid to attack our sponsors, he yelled, slamming his fist against the wood. I nodded, tapping the screen one last time. He is actively committing corporate sabotage against a multi-billion-dollar media conglomerate to extort me for a reality show contract. He is attacking your money. So the question is not whether you are going to suspend me. The question is, how many corporate lawyers are you going to unleash on him before he finishes his morning coffee? The shift in the room was instantaneous. The fear that had been directed at me transformed into a ruthless corporate bloodlust aimed squarely at Carter. The older board members who just minutes ago wanted to throw me to the wolves were now pulling out their phones, barking orders to their legal teams. Get the general counsel on the line right now, the chief executive officer yelled to his assistant. I want a defamation lawsuit filed against Carter's firm before noon. I want a restraining order. I want every shred of this financial data sent to the federal authorities. We are going to sue that man into absolute oblivion. I unplugged my tablet and slid it back into my briefcase. The suspension document lay completely forgotten on the table. The network was no longer my enemy. Carter had unwittingly turned a massive corporate legal machine into my personal attack dog. I walked out of the boardroom, my position at the network more secure than ever before. Carter thought he could play a game of public relations warfare with me. He thought he could use the media to break me. He forgot that I am the media. The glass doors of the boardroom closed behind me, sealing the panic of the network executives inside. My phone was already buzzing in my pocket. I did not need to look at the screen to know who it was. Carter's little smear campaign had failed spectacularly, and the rats were scrambling. I walked into my private office and finally pulled the phone from my pocket. It was a text message from a number I had blocked years ago, but they had clearly used a burner phone to reach me. Nadia, we need to talk, just you and me, Dad. He named an absurdly expensive private dining club downtown, a place known for its strict privacy rules and exorbitant membership fees. I knew exactly what this was. The patriarch of the family stepping in to clean up the mess his golden child and her fraudulent husband had created. He thought he could leverage the title of father to force me into submission. He thought I was still the scared little girl he had thrown away. I called my head of security and told him to meet me at the restaurant. I was not about to walk into a trap blindly. I gathered my things, my mind running through the timeline of the trap I was about to spring on him. The restaurant was dim and smelled of expensive roasted steak and aged wine. The lighting was intentionally low, casting long shadows across the velvet seating. Desmond sat in a secluded corner booth wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car. He looked up as I approached and immediately put on the mask of a heartbroken, weary old man. He stood up slowly, opening his arms for a paternal embrace. I stayed exactly where I was, my hands resting at my sides. He cleared his throat, letting his arms fall awkwardly, and sat back down, gesturing to the empty leather seat across from him. I sat down, keeping my posture perfectly straight and my expression entirely unreadable. Desmond leaned forward, clasping his hands together on the polished wood table. His voice was low, trembling with manufactured grief. Nadia, this has all gone too far, he said, shaking his head sorrowfully. Your mother is beside herself. Serena is a complete wreck. And Carter, well, you know he just gets defensive when his family is threatened. We are your family, Nadia. We never wanted this media circus. We just wanted our little girl back. I let him talk. I let him spin his pathetic web of lies, watching how easily the manipulation flowed from his lips. It was the same smooth-talking charm he had used to con his way into upper-class social circles for decades. He played the victim so well, painting me as the prodigal daughter who had caused them nothing but pain. When I did not respond to his emotional appeals, he let out a heavy sigh and shifted his tactic. The mask of the grieving father slipped away, revealing the cold, calculating businessman underneath. "Look," he continued, his tone turning practical and sharp. "The public is tearing you apart right now. Carter's video did a lot of damage, and the network board must be breathing down your neck. We can make it all go away right now. We can go on your show tomorrow, hold hands, cry, and tell the world that we have reconciled. We can save your career and your reputation. But Carter's firm is in trouble, and your mother has medical bills from all the stress of finding you. $5 million, Nadia. That is all we need. 5 million, and we fix your image and leave you in peace forever. It is a very small price to pay for a billionaire to get her family back and save her empire." He leaned back, taking a slow sip of his bourbon, looking incredibly pleased with himself. He really thought he had me cornered. He thought $5 million was a bargain for my reputation. He thought I would just write a check to make the bad press disappear. I slowly reached into my designer bag and pulled out a single manila folder. I placed it gently on the center of the table right next to his glass of bourbon. "I do not need your help with my public image," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but laced with absolute venom. "And you do not need $5 million to save Carter's failing public relations firm. You need $5 million to replace the money you stole from me 25 years ago." Desmond's confident smirk vanished instantly. His eyes darted from my face to the folder. He stared at the paper, but did not reach out to touch it. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice losing all its artificial warmth. I flipped the folder open. Inside was a yellowed medical report from the state hospital dated 25 years ago. I read the highlighted section aloud, my words cutting through the quiet restaurant. "Severe pediatric trauma resulting from a motor vehicle collision caused by an intoxicated driver. Patient requires extensive reconstructive surgery and long-term rehabilitation. Insurance settlement awarded $5 million to be held in a medical trust for the minor victim." I looked up from the paper, meeting his terrified eyes. "You drove drunk, Desmond. You crashed the car and nearly killed me and your other daughter. The insurance company paid out $5 million for my medical care and future surgeries. But you and Yvonne did not want to spend that money on a broken, difficult child. You bribed a doctor to declare me violently unstable, dumped me into the foster care system, and drained my medical trust. You used the blood money from my broken bones to buy your suburban mansion, to pay for Serena's private schools, and to fund your fake upper-class lifestyle. You built your entire existence on my pain." His face was the color of ash. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked around the restaurant frantically, as if looking for an exit strategy. "You cannot prove any of that," he finally choked out, gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. I smiled, leaning in closer. "I already have. Forensic accountants are amazing people, Desmond. They traced every single dollar from my stolen trust fund directly into your personal accounts and your real estate holdings. Which is why I paid a visit to a federal judge this morning. You see, as the victim of that fraud, I have a legal right to reclaim stolen assets." I checked my watch, acting entirely unbothered. It was 3:15 in the afternoon. "By the way," I said smoothly, "I froze all your personal and business bank accounts at exactly 3 o'clock today. The mansion, the cars, the hidden offshore funds. They are all locked. You are completely broke." The illusion of the heartbroken father shattered completely. Desmond's eyes bulged with pure, unfiltered rage. His true nature finally broke through the sophisticated facade. "You ungrateful little," he roared, lunging across the table. His hands reached for my throat, sending wine glasses and expensive silverware crashing to the floor in a shower of glass and liquid. But he never made it across the table. Before his fingers could even brush the fabric of my suit, my head of security was there. A massive hand grabbed Desmond by the back of his expensive collar and slammed him face first into the polished mahogany table. The sound of his nose hitting the wood echoed like a gunshot through the dining room. Patrons gasped and jumped out of their seats, dropping their napkins. Desmond struggled violently, cursing and spitting, but the security guard pinned his arms awkwardly behind his back, holding him down with effortless force. I calmly picked up my manila folder, brushing a stray drop of spilled bourbon off the cover. I looked down at the man who had traded my childhood for a mansion. He was bleeding onto the pristine white tablecloth, gasping for air like a caught fish. "Enjoy the dinner, Dad," I said, turning my back on him as the restaurant staff scrambled in a panic. "The bill is yours." I walked out of the restaurant, leaving Desmond bleeding on the mahogany table, and stepped into the cool evening air. My head of security flanked me, falling into step as my driver pulled the car around. I slept better that night than I had in 25 years. I had finally cut the puppet strings my biological family thought they still held. But the desperate greed of the golden child is a relentless disease. The next morning, I was back at the network headquarters preparing for my afternoon broadcast. My office on the 40th floor overlooked the entire city, a physical representation of the empire I had built with my own two hands. I was reviewing the teleprompter script when the heavy glass doors of my suite violently swung open. Serena marched into my office holding her phone high in the air, actively live streaming to her followers. Trailing right behind her were two large men wearing police uniforms. They looked imposing, but the moment they stepped onto my imported rug, something about their posture felt entirely wrong. My executive assistant stood in the hallway looking terrified, clutching her tablet to her chest. "There she is!" Serena yelled into her phone camera, pointing a manicured finger at me. "The woman who illegally froze my parents' bank accounts and assaulted our father last night. I am here with the authorities to ensure justice is served." The two men in uniform stepped forward, pulling metal handcuffs from their belts. "Miss Wilson," one of them said in a gruff, exaggerated voice, "you are under arrest for financial extortion and corporate fraud. Please place your hands behind your back." I did not stand up. I did not even close my laptop. I simply leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and studied the two men. Their badges lacked the standard issue state seal. Their duty belts were missing radios, and the fabric of their uniforms looked suspiciously like the cheap polyester blends used by local theater troupes. Carter must have scraped together the last of his hidden cash to hire these amateur actors, hoping to create a viral scandal that would force the network to fire me immediately. Serena shoved her phone closer to my face. Her eyes were wide with manufactured panic, but her mouth twitched with a triumphant smirk. "The whole world is watching, Nadia," she sneered. "Are you going to resist arrest on live television?" I slowly picked up my cell phone from the desk. "You know, Serena," I said, my voice perfectly calm and measured, "when you hire fake police officers to stage an arrest inside a corporate headquarters, you should probably make sure the target does not have the personal cell phone number of the actual chief of police on speed dial." Serena's smirk faltered. The two fake officers exchanged a sudden nervous glance. Their hands hovered awkwardly over the cheap handcuffs. I pressed a single button on my screen and put the phone on speaker, setting it gently on the glass desk. It rang twice before a deep, authoritative voice answered. "Nadia, sweetheart," the chief said warmly. "How is your adoptive mother doing? She promised to bring her famous peach cobbler to the precinct this weekend." "She is doing wonderfully, Chief," I replied, keeping my eyes locked on Serena's rapidly paling face. "But I actually have a slight security issue at the network today. My biological sister just walked into my private office with two men impersonating police officers. They are currently attempting to unlawfully detain me on a live internet broadcast." The cheerful warmth in the chief's voice vanished instantly, replaced by sharp professional authority. "Impersonating an officer is a federal offense, Nadia. Lock down the floor. My men will be there in 3 minutes." I ended the call. The silence in my office was deafening. The two actors looked at each other, pure terror washing over their faces. They dropped the handcuffs on my carpet and bolted for the door, practically shoving Serena out of the way. They did not make it far. My building's security had already sealed the elevators, and within moments, a swarm of real police officers flooded the 40th floor, tackling the two imposters to the ground and reading them their rights. Serena stood frozen in the middle of my office. Her phone was still recording, still broadcasting her absolute humiliation to hundreds of thousands of viewers. Her hand shook so badly the camera feed must have been making her audience nauseous. She looked around wildly, realizing that Carter's brilliant public relations stunt had just resulted in multiple felony charges. "Turn the camera off, Serena," I commanded, standing up and walking around my desk to face her. She clutched the phone tighter, her breathing ragged. "No," she cried, her voice cracking. "No, you are a monster. You took our parents' money. You are trying to ruin us." "You ruined yourselves," I said, stepping so close to her that she had to look up to meet my gaze. "And speaking of money, Serena, why do you not explain to your lovely audience why your platinum credit cards were declined at 3 different luxury boutiques this morning?" She gasped, taking a step back as if I had physically struck her. "How do you know about that?" "That," she whispered, forgetting that her live stream was picking up every single word. "I know everything," I said softly, but clearly. "I know you have been funding your glamorous influencer lifestyle by skimming donations off the top of the youth literacy charity you claim to run. I know the Internal Revenue Service flagged the accounts last week, which is why your cards are bouncing. You did not come here today for justice, Serena. You came here to extort me because the federal auditors are knocking on your door and you need cash to stay out of a federal penitentiary." Serena stared at me, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. She looked down at her phone, reading the comments flooding her screen as her followers realized they had been donating to a fraud. The reality of her shattered life finally set in. The silence in my office after Serena was hauled away in handcuffs felt like a deep cleansing breath. I spent the next 3 weeks watching my biological family completely unravel from a comfortable distance, while my own empire continued to expand. My network ratings skyrocketed, and my public image shifted from the targeted victim to an untouchable powerhouse. That brings us to Saturday night. I was attending the annual Horizon Women of Excellence Gala, a highly exclusive event celebrating the achievements of Black women in media and business. The ballroom was a sea of emerald and gold velvet draped across tables and crystal chandeliers glowing overhead. Hundreds of the most influential people in the city were dressed in their absolute best, sipping champagne and networking. I was slated to receive the Visionary Award for my investigative journalism. I sat at the head table feeling a rare moment of genuine peace, surrounded by peers who respected my work. The evening was flawless until the keynote speech began. The current speaker was a prominent civil rights attorney, and the crowd was completely silent listening to her opening remarks. Suddenly, there was a sharp screech of microphone feedback that made everyone wince. I looked toward the stage and my blood ran cold. Stepping out from the shadows of the velvet curtains, grabbing a spare microphone from a podium, was Yvonne. She was wearing a modest black dress, clearly designed to make her look like a grieving widow rather than the greedy opportunist she actually was. The security guards were already rushing down the aisles, but Yvonne held up her hands and let out a loud, gut-wrenching sob that echoed through the massive sound system. "Please wait!" she cried out, her voice cracking perfectly for the acoustics of the room. "Please, I beg of you, just give a desperate mother 2 minutes to save her child's life." The security guards hesitated, looking toward the event organizers who were equally confused. The entire ballroom murmured in shock as all eyes turned to Yvonne standing center stage. I remained seated at my table, keeping my face completely blank. I knew exactly what she was doing. Desmond had failed. Serena had failed. Now it was the matriarch's turn to try and destroy my credibility in front of the exact demographic I belonged to and served. "My daughter Nadia is in this room tonight." Yvonne wept, wiping away non-existent tears. "To the world, she looks like a successful billionaire anchor. But behind closed doors, she is suffering from severe unmedicated paranoid schizophrenia." The crowd gasped. A collective wave of uncomfortable whispers swept across the ballroom. People started glancing in my direction. I did not move a muscle. She has pushed her family away because her mind is poisoned by paranoid delusions." Yvonne continued, her voice shaking with fake agony. "She thinks her own parents are trying to hurt her. She had her own sister arrested based on hallucinations. We are terrified she is going to hurt herself or someone else. We have exhausted all our resources trying to get her psychiatric help, but she uses her massive wealth to avoid treatment. I snuck in here tonight to plead with her peers. Please help us raise the funds to petition the courts for a mandatory psychiatric hold. Help me save my sick, beautiful girl before she destroys herself. It was a masterful performance. She hit every single note of maternal desperation, tapping into the crowd's empathy. By labeling me as a paranoid schizophrenic, she was attempting to invalidate everything I had done and everything I was about to do. If she could convince this room of elite Black professionals that my actions were the result of a severe mental break, the network would drop me instantly, and she could swoop in as my legal conservator. She wanted to institutionalize me and take control of my fortune. The room was heavy with shock. Several people were actually dabbing their eyes. Yvonne looked down at me from the stage, her face a mask of tragedy, but her eyes glittering with malicious triumph. She thought she had finally played the ultimate trump card. I slowly stood up from my table. The rustle of my silk gown seemed deafening in the quiet ballroom. I did not look angry or unhinged. I walked toward the stage with the slow, deliberate pacing of an apex predator. The crowd parted for me, letting me walk right up the steps. Yvonne instinctively took a step back as I approached, but I just held out my hand. "Give me the microphone, Yvonne," I said softly. She clutched it to her chest, shaking her head. "Nadia, sweetheart, you need help," she wailed into the mic. I reached out and smoothly pulled the microphone from her grip. She let it go easily, probably thinking any aggression from me would only prove her point. I turned to face the hundreds of powerful women in the room. I smiled, letting a moment of calm stretch between us. "Mental illness is a serious tragedy," I said, my voice steady and resonant. "It tears families apart and destroys lives. It is also the exact excuse my biological mother used 25 years ago to steal a $5 million medical settlement meant for my reconstructive surgeries after my father drove his car into a tree." The crowd went dead silent. Yvonne let out a loud, offended gasp. "Nadia, stop, your delusions are taking over," she cried out, reaching for my arm. I stepped away from her and looked up at the massive digital projection screens flanking the stage. "Earlier this evening, my security team intercepted a very interesting vintage audio cassette from a storage unit owned by my biological parents," I told the ballroom. "I had my sound engineers digitize it just in case I needed it. Please direct your attention to the screens." I nodded to the AV booth in the back of the room. The screens faded to black and the crackle of an old cassette tape filled the ballroom. Then a voice cut through the static. It was younger, but unmistakably Yvonne. The audio boomed through the speakers. "Dr. Reynolds, we just cannot deal with her anymore. The settlement money cleared yesterday. If Child Protective Services takes her, we keep the funds, right?" A male voice replied, equally clear. "Yes, Mrs. Wilson, but we need a severe diagnosis to justify relinquishing custody without surrendering the medical trust." The recorded voice of my mother let out a cold, hard laugh that made the gala attendees visibly flinch. "Then write down whatever you need to write down, doctor. Paranoid schizophrenia sounds good. Put that in the file. Here is the 50,000 we agreed on in cash. Just get the little brat out of my house before the weekend." The recording clicked and hissed into silence. The silence that followed in the ballroom was absolute and suffocating. Thousands of eyes slowly turned from the screens down to Yvonne. The look of collective horror and pure, unadulterated disgust from the crowd was palpable. The elegant women in the audience were staring at her as if she were covered in venom. I turned back to Yvonne. She was frozen, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it looked like she might collapse. She had just broadcast her own monstrous crime to the most powerful people in the city. I leaned into the microphone. "You are right, Yvonne," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing calm. "Someone in this room belongs in an institution, but it is definitely not me." The security guards did not even wait for my command. They moved in and escorted Yvonne out of the ballroom while the elite crowd watched in absolute stunned silence. Nobody clapped, nobody whispered. They just stared at the woman who had sold her own daughter for cash. I walked back to my table and took a sip of my sparkling water, feeling the heavy weight of 25 years of gaslighting finally lift off my shoulders. My phone buzzed with an alert from my legal team. The recording was already in the hands of the district attorney. The statute of limitations on the fraud might be complicated, but the public execution of Yvonne's character was permanent. But the golden child and her desperate husband were not ready to surrender. Carter had watched his mother-in-law get destroyed on the massive screens and realized his reality show dreams were completely dead. His back taxes were due, and his PR firm was bleeding out. He needed a massive payday, and he needed it immediately. He was arrogant enough to think he could still outsmart me. If he could not use my network, he would use my biggest competitor. Carter reached out to the editor-in-chief of the Daily Chronicle, a notorious tabloid known for tearing down powerful black women. He brokered a massive exclusive deal. The headline was already drafted. "My wife is abused by her billionaire sister, the dark truth behind Nadia's empire." Carter fed them a narrative that the audio tape I played at the gala was an artificial intelligence deepfake. He claimed I was a ruthless tyrant who was starving my own family to feed my corporate ego. He promised them photos, medical records, and exclusive interviews with Serena crying about her traumatic childhood. The story was scheduled to drop at exactly 8 in the morning on a Tuesday. Carter and Serena probably sat in their heavily mortgaged living room, refreshing their browsers, waiting for my stock to plummet. They thought they had found my blind spot. They thought a rival media outlet was out of my reach. They never considered that a woman with a media empire and unlimited capital does not just manage the news, she owns the news. At 7:55 in the morning, Carter's phone rang. It was not the tabloid editor congratulating him on a viral hit. It was me. I was sitting in my corner office watching the sun rise over the city. "Good morning, Carter," I said, keeping my tone bright and professional. "I just wanted to thank you for bringing the Daily Chronicle to my attention." Their parent company was struggling financially. It turns out they were incredibly eager to accept a hostile buyout. As of 6 o'clock this morning, Horizon Holdings is the new majority owner of the Chronicle. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. He tried to speak, but the panic froze his vocal cords. "I am afraid your exclusive story will not be running today, Carter," I continued. "The new management has decided to take the publication in a different direction. In fact, I just fired the editor-in-chief you were working with. He was escorted out of the building 5 minutes ago. You cannot do this." Carter finally choked out, his voice high and thin with absolute terror. "We will go to another outlet. We will go to the police. We will tell everyone." "You will not be going anywhere, Carter," I replied, my voice dropping to a dead calm. "Because you are going to be far too busy dealing with your wife. You see, while you were busy trying to sell fake stories about my mental health, I was doing some fact-checking of my own. I just sent Serena a very special delivery via same-day courier. She should be opening it right about now." "What did you do?" he demanded, a frantic edge of hysteria bleeding into his words. "Just a small portfolio," I explained smoothly. 85 high-resolution photographs of you and your 22-year-old assistant spending weekends at a luxury hotel downtown. The same hotel you charged to Serena's credit card. The same credit card she pays off using stolen charity funds. I even included the room service receipts. It is amazing how much champagne you two ordered while your wife was busy crying on internet live streams. I heard a sudden piercing scream in the background of the call. It was Serena. The sound of glass shattering echoed through the phone, followed by a barrage of unhinged cursing. Carter dropped the phone. I listened to the beautiful chaos of my sister and her husband tearing each other apart in their living room. The golden child was finally getting a taste of the betrayal she had enabled her entire life. I smiled, pressing the end call button, and turned my attention back to the city skyline. The villains in my story were no longer my problem. They were too busy destroying each other. I stepped away from the window of my corner office, letting the sound of my sister's distant screams fade from my mind, but my work for the day was far from over. I picked up my tablet and walked down to the private underground garage where my driver was waiting in my black SUV. I slid into the plush leather back seat and told him to pull out of the building, but remain parked on the street. I did not need to be physically present for this next act. I had front row seats right in the palm of my hand. I tapped the screen of my tablet, bringing up a crisp, high-definition video feed. The camera was perfectly positioned inside Carter's failing public relations firm, offering a sweeping view of his personal executive office. 2 days ago, I had legally acquired the massive pile of debt Carter's company owed to various vendors. As the new primary debt holder, I had exercised my legal right to send a collection and inventory team to assess his physical assets. My security team, disguised as corporate auditors, had swept his office and casually left behind 3 microscopic cameras embedded in the smoke detectors. It was entirely legal and entirely devastating. On my screen, the heavy wooden doors of Carter's office flew open. Serena marched inside, looking like a hurricane of pure vengeance. Her designer dress was rumpled, and her perfect hair was wildly out of place. She was holding the thick manila envelope I had couriered to her, gripping it so hard her knuckles were white. Carter scrambled into the room right behind her, begging her to calm down and close the door. Serena did not calm down. She hurled the envelope at his chest, sending dozens of glossy photographs fluttering through the air like toxic snow. On my tablet screen, I could clearly see the images of Carter and his young assistant drinking champagne in plush hotel robes. Serena let out a guttural scream and grabbed a heavy crystal award off his desk. She hurled it directly at his head. Carter ducked just in time, and the crystal shattered against the glass wall of his office, sending shards everywhere. "You humiliated me!" Serena shrieked, sweeping her arm across his desk and sending his expensive monitors and keyboard crashing to the floor. "You took my money to pay for a hotel room with a 22-year-old girl while I was fighting my psychotic sister for our family. You are a pathetic, cheating parasite." Carter backed away from her, his hands raised in a defensive panic. "Serena, please listen to me," he pleaded, his voice trembling. "It meant nothing. She meant nothing. I was just stressed about the money and the business." Before Serena could pick up another object to throw, the office doors burst open again. Desmond and Yvonne rushed into the room, breathing heavily. They must have followed Serena from their house, terrified of what she might do. Yvonne took one look at the photographs scattered across the ruined office, and her face drained of all color. She rushed forward and grabbed Serena's arm, pulling her away from Carter's desk. "Let me go," Serena sobbed, fighting against her mother's grip. "I am going to destroy him. I am calling my lawyers right now. I am going to drag his name through the mud and leave him with absolutely nothing. He is going to rot in a cell for stealing my charity funds." Desmond moved faster than I had ever seen him move. He grabbed Serena by both shoulders and shook her hard, forcing her to look at him. "Shut your mouth right now, Serena," he hissed, his voice low and frantic. "You are not calling any lawyers, and you are not divorcing him. You are going to smile and stand by your husband." Serena stared at our father in absolute betrayal. "He cheated on me," she cried out, her voice breaking. "He took my money and he slept with his assistant. Why are you defending him?" "I am not defending him," Desmond growled, casting a terrified glance at the open office door before kicking it shut. "I am protecting us. Carter is the one who set up the shell companies for my real estate firm. He is the one who falsified the donor records for your literacy charity so we could siphon the cash to pay for the mortgage on the mansion. He knows exactly where every single stolen dollar went." Yvonne nodded frantically, picking up the scattered photos and shoving them back into the envelope. "If you drag him into a messy public divorce and try to send him to prison for the charity money, he will not go down alone," she whispered, her voice shaking with terror. "He will hand the federal auditors our entire financial history. He has the tax records, Serena. He has the offshore account numbers. If Carter goes to prison for fraud, he will take your father and me right down with him. We have been evading taxes for a decade, and Carter holds the keys to all of it." Carter slowly stood up straight, brushing off his suit jacket. The panic on his face was completely gone, replaced by a cold, sickening smirk. His eyes darted between my biological parents and his furious wife. "They are absolutely right," Serena, Carter sneered, stepping over his broken monitors. "You are going to pack up your little tantrum, and you are going to go home. Because if I fall, I am pulling the pin on a grenade that will obliterate the entire Wilson family. You will all be sharing a cell block by Christmas." Serena collapsed into a leather guest chair, burying her face in her hands and weeping uncontrollably. Desmond and Yvonne stood frozen, trapped in a prison of their own making. They had traded their morality for money, and now they were entirely at the mercy of a desperate, cheating coward. They were terrified, powerless, and completely exposed. In the quiet safety of my parked SUV, I smiled and tapped the screen of my tablet, saving the high-definition video file to my secure cloud server. My heart beat with a steady, victorious rhythm. Desmond and Yvonne thought Carter was the only one holding their dark financial secrets. They had no idea that I had just watched them explicitly confess to a decade of federal tax evasion, offshore shell companies, and charity fraud on crystal-clear audio and video. The trap was finally set, and the Golden family had just locked themselves inside. The silence of my SUV was a stark contrast to the absolute destruction I had just recorded. I sent the files to my legal team with a single instruction to prepare the final strike. But Yvonne was a desperate, cornered animal, and animals like her always have one last trick to play when they realize the walls are closing in. She knew Carter was a ticking time bomb, and she knew her reputation was bleeding out in the public eye. She needed a distraction so massive it would force me to back down out of sheer social pressure. Less than 48 hours after her confession in Carter's ruined office, my phone began buzzing endlessly. My public relations manager sent me a link that was already dominating every social media platform. I tapped the screen and there was my biological mother. She was lying in a hospital bed hooked up to heart monitors and oxygen tubes, looking frail and sickly pale. The video was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Yvonne spoke in a weak, breathless whisper, staring directly into the camera with tears pooling in her eyes. She claimed her heart was failing her. She claimed the stress of our family conflict had triggered a massive cardiac event, and the doctors had given her only days to live. She looked directly through the lens and begged me to come to her bedside. She pleaded for a final forgiving goodbye from her estranged daughter before she passed away. She told the world she just wanted to hold my hand one last time and make peace with God. Within hours, the internet completely turned on me. The public loves a redemption story, but they love tearing down a successful Black woman even more. The comments were brutal, calling me a heartless billionaire, a monster who was letting her own mother die of a broken heart. Talk shows debated my lack of humanity, and hashtags demanding I visit her were trending worldwide. Yvonne had successfully painted herself as the tragic victim, using her own supposed mortality as a weapon. She thought I would panic. She thought I would rush to the hospital under the glare of paparazzi cameras, hold her hand, and publicly drop all my grievances just to save my own network ratings. She thought the pressure of the entire world would bend me to her will. She forgot that I had spent 25 years studying her lies. I did not issue a public statement, and I did not rush to her side in tears. Instead, I made 3 phone calls. One to my legal team, one to the chief administrator of the hospital where she was staying, and one to an independent medical evaluation board. When I arrived at the hospital later that afternoon, the lobby was swarming with reporters. My security team cleared a path through the flashing cameras and shouted questions. I kept my face completely neutral as we rode the elevator up to the cardiac intensive care unit. Yvonne had managed to get herself placed in the most expensive VIP suite in the hospital. I walked into her room. Desmond and Serena were sitting on plush chairs, acting like grieving relatives. Yvonne was resting against the pillows, but when she saw me enter, her eyes lit up with a victory she could barely conceal. She weakly reached her hand out toward me, putting on a pathetic performance of a dying mother seeking grace. "Nadia," she whispered, her voice shaking beautifully. "You came. I knew you would not let me leave this earth without making peace." I stood at the foot of her bed with my hands folded in front of me. I did not reach out to take her hand. I just watched her act. "I am not here to make peace, Yvonne," I said softly, my voice carrying through the quiet room. "I am here to get a second opinion." Before she could drop her hand, the heavy wooden door to her suite opened again. 4 people walked into the room. 2 were members of the hospital's executive board, and the third was the chief of cardiology. The fourth was an independent toxicologist I had flown in explicitly for this moment. Desmond stood up quickly, his face twisting into an ugly mask of panic. "What is the meaning of this?" Desmond demanded, puffing out his chest. "My wife is in critical condition and you bring a crowd into her recovery room." The chief of cardiology ignored him and walked straight to the end of Yvonne's bed, holding a thick medical file. "Miss Wilson," the doctor said, looking directly at me and completely ignoring the fake dying woman. "Per your request and following hospital protocol regarding suspected medical fraud, we ran a complete independent workup on the patient." Yvonne ripped the oxygen tube away from her face, her sickly demeanor vanishing instantly. "You have no right to my medical records," she shrieked, her voice suddenly full of strength and venom. "Actually, she does," the hospital administrator said, stepping forward. "As the primary financial sponsor of this wing of the hospital, and the person you publicly named as your emergency contact in your viral video, Miss Wilson has the legal right to request a fraud investigation." The chief of cardiology opened the file. "The results are quite remarkable," the doctor said, staring at Yvonne with absolute disgust. "Your mother does not have a failing heart, Miss Wilson. In fact, her echocardiogram shows the heart of a perfectly healthy woman. However, her comprehensive blood panel revealed something else entirely." Serena backed away from the bed, looking terrified. Desmond was frozen in place. The toxicologist stepped forward. "The patient has lethal levels of an illegal synthetic stimulant mixed with prescription beta blockers in her bloodstream. This specific cocktail is often used on the black market to artificially induce the exact symptoms of a severe cardiac event without actually damaging the heart muscle. You did not have a heart attack, ma'am. You poisoned yourself with illegal narcotics to stage a medical emergency." The silence in the hospital room was so profound, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Yvonne's mouth hung open. The monitors beside her bed beeped steadily, proving how perfectly healthy her heart really was. The grand illusion was shattered completely. I leaned over the foot of the bed, looking right into her panicked eyes. "You begged the whole world for a final goodbye, Yvonne," I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any pity. "And I think you are going to get it. But not from me." I stepped aside as the hospital administrator pulled a radio from his belt. "Send the police up to Suite 4, he said into the device. "We have a confirmed case of narcotics possession and massive medical fraud." Yvonne began to scream, thrashing against the hospital blankets, as the reality of her choices finally closed like a steel trap around her. Desmond did not stay to watch his wife get handcuffed to her hospital bed. The moment the police officers stepped off the elevator, he backed away from the room, sliding into the shadows, like the coward he had always been. He did not look at Serena, who was frozen in shock against the wall. He did not look at me. He just turned and ran. He knew the game was entirely over. Carter had the documents, and I had the recording of their confession. The federal authorities were already tearing through Horizon Holdings and his real estate firm. Desmond had spent his entire life building an empire on lies and stolen money. Building an empire on lies. Building an empire on the backs of people he stepped on. But he was not going to let himself be locked in a cage. He drove frantically back to the family mansion, leaving his golden child and his manipulative wife to face the authorities alone. He went straight to his hidden floor safe in the master bedroom. He quietly liquidated whatever assets he could access in the span of 3 hours. He drained the offshore accounts that were not yet frozen, transferring the funds through a maze of crypto wallets. He emptied the emergency cash reserves, stuffing stacks of $100 bills into a leather duffel bag, along with his expensive watches and gold cufflinks. He was running. He was doing what he did best. He was running away from the mess he created. He was running away from his family. He logged onto a secure browser and bought one-way tickets to Europe. Geneva first, then a train to a quiet town in Switzerland, where the extradition laws were complicated. He did not buy a ticket for Yvonne. He did not buy a ticket for Serena. He only bought a ticket for himself. Preservation of the self at all costs. That was the Desmond Wilson way. The drive to the international airport was a blur of paranoia. He kept checking his rearview mirror, terrified that federal agents in unmarked cars were tailing him. But the road was clear. He made it to the departure terminal, gripping his heavy leather bag, feeling the cold sweat of adrenaline on his neck. He walked briskly into the massive building, blending in with the crowds of oblivious tourists and weary business travelers. He approached the first-class check-in counter with a forced smile. The agent greeted him politely and asked for his travel documents. Desmond handed over his pristine navy blue passport, his ticket out of hell. He stood there tapping his expensive leather shoes against the polished floor, imagining the taste of champagne on the transatlantic flight, imagining the freedom of disappearing. But the agent did not hand the passport back. She swiped it through the scanner once, then she swiped it again. Her polite smile faded into a tight frown of confusion. "Sir," she said, her voice dropping to a cautious whisper, "there seems to be an issue with your documents." "What do you mean, an issue?" Desmond snapped, his forced charm instantly cracking. "Swipe it again. There is no issue. I am a platinum member." "I am sorry, sir," the agent replied, tapping her keyboard frantically. "My screen is showing a red flag from the federal authorities. Your passport has been invalidated. I need to call port security." Desmond felt the blood drain from his face. He reached across the counter, trying to snatch his passport back, but the agent pulled it out of her reach. The panic seized his throat. The absolute terror seized his lungs. He looked around wildly, searching for an exit, searching for a place to run. He grabbed his leather duffel bag, preparing to sprint back out the sliding glass doors into the cold night air. But he did not make it. I stepped out from behind the large concrete pillar just 10 feet away from his counter. I wore a tailored black coat and a calm, satisfied smile. 2 federal agents in dark suits stepped out right behind me, blocking his only path to the exit. Desmond froze, his eyes wide with absolute horror. The heavy leather bag slipped from his fingers and hit the ground with a dull thud. "Hello, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the busy terminal loud and clear. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly like a suffocating fish. He looked at the agents and then back to me, finally understanding the sheer magnitude of my preparation. I had not just been 1 step ahead of him. I had been 10 steps ahead. The travel ban took effect exactly 5 minutes ago. I continued walking slowly toward him until I was standing just inches away. "I made sure to file the emergency injunction the moment you drove away from the hospital. I tracked your offshore transfers and sent the logs directly to the federal prosecutor. All of your accounts are seized, Desmond. Every single stolen dollar is gone." He trembled, his imposing figure shrinking right before my eyes. "You are my daughter." He choked out a pathetic, desperate whisper. "How could you do this to your own flesh and blood?" I tilted my head, studying the man who had always treated me like a broken financial burden. The man who had traded my peace for his vanity. The man who had watched his wife abandon me without a second thought. "How does it feel to be abandoned at an airport?" I asked softly, watching the realization destroy him. "How does it feel to be left behind with absolutely nothing?" Desmond dropped to his knees right there in the airport terminal, the polished floor offering no comfort as the reality of his total defeat finally set in. The federal agents did not give him the dignity of a quiet exit. They pulled his arms firmly behind his back and locked cold steel handcuffs around his wrists, while dozens of onlookers recorded the humiliating spectacle on their phones. His heavy leather duffel bag packed with stolen hundreds and gold watches was seized as evidence right in front of him. He was marched out through the sliding glass doors into the night, left with nothing but the tailored suit on his back and the crushing weight of his own destroyed ego. Within 48 hours, the entire Wilson family empire crumbled into absolute dust. Yvonne was formally discharged from her luxury hospital suite in complete disgrace. The police had shackled her to the bed rails until the doctors cleared her, then escorted her out of the building in a cheap paper gown because her designer clothes had been seized along with her assets. Serena faced an equally brutal awakening. She returned to her sprawling suburban mansion, only to find the bank had already changed the locks. Foreclosure notices were plastered across the pristine white pillars of her porch, and her expensive luggage had been unceremoniously dumped on the front lawn. Carter was completely gone, having taken whatever scraps of hidden cash he could find before fleeing the state. They were entirely locked out, every credit card declined, Every bank account frozen by federal mandate. The elite friends they had bought with stolen charity funds suddenly stopped answering their calls. The country club barred them from the gates. The Golden family was suddenly living the desperate, terrifying reality they had carelessly forced upon me all those years ago. It was pouring rain on a Thursday night when the intercom on my desk buzzed. I was sitting in my private home office reviewing the latest ratings for my media network while listening to the storm lash against the floor-to-ceiling windows. My security chief spoke through the speaker, telling me there was a severe situation at the main gate of my estate. I pulled up the live security feed on my monitor and sat back in my chair, letting the poetic justice of the scene wash over me. Standing outside the massive wrought iron gates of my compound, getting absolutely drenched by the relentless freezing rain, were Desmond, Yvonne, and Serena. They did not look like the arrogant, untouchable elite anymore. Their clothes were soaked through and clinging to their shivering bodies. Yvonne's perfect hair was plastered flat against her face, and Serena was hugging her arms, looking small and terrified as the wind whipped around them. Desmond, the proud patriarch who had once ruled our family with an iron fist, was arguing weakly with my armed guards, pressing his face against the wet metal bars. "They are refusing to leave," ma'am, my security chief said, his voice entirely detached. "They are begging to speak with you. They say they have nowhere else to go." I watched the screen for a long moment. 25 years ago, I had begged them for just a fraction of their love, and they had slammed the door in my face, telling me I was a burden they could no longer carry. Now they were standing outside my fortress, shivering in the dark, begging for my mercy. I walked down the grand, curving staircase of my home and motioned for my security team to open the heavy wooden front doors. I stepped out onto the sprawling marble driveway, a massive black umbrella held over my head by my lead guard. The rain pounded against the pavement, echoing loudly in the cold night. As soon as the iron gates slowly swung open, the three of them stumbled forward onto the property, slipping on the wet gravel. They did not shout demands. They did not try to gaslight me or pretend they were the innocent victims of a misunderstanding. The sheer desperation of their poverty had completely broken them. Desmond dropped to his knees right there in the muddy driveway, his expensive suit soaking up the dirty water. Yvonne and Serena immediately followed, collapsing into the mud beside him. "Nadia, please!" Desmond cried out, his voice cracking horribly as the freezing rain washed over his face. "We have absolutely nothing left. The feds took the cars, they took the house, our accounts are frozen. We have not eaten since yesterday morning. Please, you have to help us." Serena looked up at me, sobbing violently. "I am sorry," she wailed, burying her face in her muddy hands. "I am so sorry for everything, Nadia." Carter took the last of the money and ran. "My friends will not even let me sleep on their couches. We are going to be living on the street. Please do not let us die out here." I stood in the dry safety of my umbrella, looking down at the people who had made my childhood a living nightmare. They were shivering, pathetic, and entirely broken. The power dynamic had completely inverted, and they were finally feeling the agonizing sting of being unwanted. "You want my help?" I asked, my voice cold and steady, cutting effortlessly through the sound of the pouring rain. "You want me to lift the asset freeze and call off my legal team so you can eat and sleep in a warm bed tonight?" "Yes," Yvonne gasped, reaching a shaking, muddy hand toward my boots. "Anything, Nadia. We will do anything you ask. Just please give us a chance to survive this." I looked at her reaching hand and felt absolutely no pity. "I will lift the freeze on your secondary accounts tonight," I said slowly, making sure they heard every single word over the raging storm. "I will give you back just enough money to secure a small apartment and buy food. But it comes with one non-negotiable condition." "What is it?" Desmond asked eagerly, nodding his head in the mud like a desperate animal. "Name your price. Tomorrow night is the season finale of my primetime network show." "The Truth Unveiled," I explained, staring down at them with dead calm eyes. "You are going to be my exclusive guests. The three of you will sit on my stage on live television, and you will take a polygraph test administered by a federal expert. You will answer every single question I ask you about the charity fraud, the tax evasion, and exactly how you abused and discarded me for 25 years. You will confess your sins to the entire world with nowhere to hide and no edits to save you." Serena gasped, shaking her head in sheer horror. We would be ruined permanently, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. We could never show our faces in public again. Everyone would know exactly what we did. You are already ruined, Serena, I replied, my tone dropping to a chilling whisper. This is just the final receipt. So what is it going to be? The absolute truth on live television, or the streets in the freezing rain? They looked at each other, shivering and terrified, realizing they were completely trapped in a corner with absolutely no way out. Desmond slowly lowered his head into the mud, his broad shoulders shaking in total defeat. We will do it, he whispered brokenly, the last of his pride washing away in the storm. We will go on the show. The 48 hours leading up to the live broadcast of The Truth Unveiled were a masterclass in silent psychological warfare. My security team escorted Desmond, Yvonne, and Serena to a heavily guarded hotel downtown, giving them exactly enough money for room service and nothing else. They were trapped completely at my mercy, waiting for their public execution. The studio was buzzing with electric anticipation when Friday night finally arrived. My network had promoted the exclusive interview relentlessly. Promos flashed across billboards in Times Square and dominated social media feeds, promising the ultimate unmasking of the Wilson family empire. The entire country was tuning in. I arrived at the studio 3 hours before showtime. The backstage area was a labyrinth of cables lighting crews and nervous producers. I had assigned the Golden family to a cramped dressing room at the end of the hall, far away from my sprawling executive suite. Serena, pacing the cheap linoleum floor of her assigned room, was vibrating with a toxic mix of panic and petty rage. She had lost her mansion, her husband, and her elite status, but her vanity remained completely intact. She could not stand the thought of me looking powerful and composed on national television while she was forced to sit on a stool and confess her crimes. She needed to tear me down. She needed the audience to think I was the unstable one. Serena had managed to sneak a small vial of industrial-grade itching powder past my security guards, hiding it inside a hollowed-out tube of designer lipstick. It was a highly concentrated fiberglass-based irritant, known to cause severe, uncontrollable skin reactions the second it made contact with body heat and sweat. 45 minutes before we were scheduled to go live, Serena saw her opportunity. My personal assistant had hung my wardrobe options on a rolling rack in the hallway outside my suite, while the seamstress steamed a backup outfit. Serena slipped out of her room, checking the corridor to ensure it was empty. She quickly approached the rack and found the stunning emerald green couture gown I had selected for the broadcast. With shaking hands, she uncapped the hidden vial and dusted the entire interior lining of the gown with the invisible fiberglass powder, rubbing it deep into the silk fabric where it would sit directly against my skin. She smiled a wicked, vindictive smile and hurried back to her dressing room, imagining me squirming and scratching like a lunatic on live television. But Serena was always so blinded by her own arrogance that she forgot who owned the building. She forgot that as the head of a major media network, I did not leave a single square inch of my studio unmonitored. I was sitting in the control room watching a wall of high-definition security monitors when she made her little sabotage run. I watched her dust the green gown with perfect clarity. I did not flinch, and I did not send security to drag her away. I just picked up my radio and called my head of wardrobe. Change of plans, I said smoothly, staring at Serena's smug face on the monitor. I will be wearing the black tailored suit tonight. Take the emerald green gown to Serena's dressing room. Tell her the network executives insist she wears it because the color contrasts better with the stage lighting. Tell her it is mandatory for the broadcast. I watched the monitors as the wardrobe director knocked on Serena's door and handed her the laced green dress. I watched Serena's face pale slightly as she realized what she was being asked to put on. She tried to refuse, but my staff was relentless, reminding her that her appearance on the show and her subsequent financial lifeline was entirely contingent on following my exact rules. Trapped by her own desperation and unwilling to confess what she had done, Serena had no choice. She slipped the beautiful poison dress over her head. The countdown clock in the studio hit 0. The applause sign flashed and the massive studio doors slid open. The theme music swelled as I walked out onto the brightly lit stage. The audience erupted into cheers. I took my seat in the center leather chair, radiating absolute control. A moment later, Desmond, Yvonne, and Serena were introduced. They walked out from behind the curtain, looking like prisoners marching to the gallows. Desmond was sweating profusely under the hot studio lights. Yvonne kept her eyes glued to the floor, shivering despite the warmth of the room. And then there was Serena. She walked out in the emerald green gown, and I could already see the horror setting in. The intense heat of the studio lights combined with her overwhelming nervous sweat had instantly activated the industrial powder lining the dress. She took her seat across from me, shifting uncomfortably. "We are here tonight to discuss the truth," I began, my voice echoing through the massive studio and broadcasting into millions of living rooms across the globe. For years, the Wilson family has presented a flawless facade of charity and success, but tonight, we are going to look behind the curtain. As I spoke, Serena reached a hand up to scratch her shoulder. A second later, she scratched her neck. The fiberglass powder was digging into her pores, acting like microscopic shards of glass tearing at her skin. Her movements grew more frantic. While Desmond tried to answer my first question about his real estate holdings, Serena began clawing at her arms. The thick television makeup on her face started to streak as she rubbed her jaw wildly. The cameras pushed in for a close-up, catching every agonizing second. Serena's perfectly manicured nails dug into her collarbone, leaving angry red welts across her skin. She was twisting in her chair, unable to sit still, gasping for air, as the burning itch spread across her entire body. The audience began to murmur, pointing at the golden child who was now squirming and clawing at herself like a feral animal. "Serena, are you quite all right?" I asked, pausing the interview and looking at her with manufactured concern. "You seem incredibly uncomfortable." She gasped, digging her nails into her thighs, tearing at the expensive green fabric. I need a minute. The dress is burning me." She looked absolutely unhinged. Her hair was a mess. Her skin was flushed with violent red rashes, and she was practically tearing her own clothes off on live television. Millions of viewers were watching the flawless, elegant influencer completely lose her mind, scratching her skin raw in front of the entire world. Her pristine image was completely obliterated in a matter of minutes. Just as Serena let out a loud, uncontrollable sob of pure physical agony, the heavy double doors at the back of the stage opened. The federal polygraph examiner walked out, pushing a cart loaded with wire sensors and a lie detector machine. He stopped right next to Serena's chair, looking down at her ruined, bleeding skin. "The show is just getting started," I said, leaning forward in my chair. "Strap them in." The polygraph examiner moved with clinical precision. He stepped up to Serena first, ignoring her frantic squirming and the angry red scratches covering her neck and arms. He wrapped the blood pressure cuff tightly around her bicep and secured the pneumatic tubes across her chest. She whimpered, but did not resist, knowing the federal authorities were waiting in the wings. Next, he wired up Yvonne, who sat completely motionless, staring blankly at the floor like a shattered porcelain doll. Finally, he turned to Desmond. The great patriarch was sweating so heavily that the examiner had to wipe his fingers with a towel before attaching the galvanic skin sensors. The studio lights dimmed, plunging the audience into darkness, while bright white spotlights focused entirely on the four of us. A massive digital screen illuminated behind us, casting a harsh glow over the stage. The silence in the room was absolute. Millions of people were watching this live feed, waiting for the Golden family to finally answer for their crimes. I leaned back in my leather chair, crossing my legs. I looked directly at the man who had once ordered me out of his house and called me a failure. "Desmond Wilson," I said, my voice perfectly calm and echoing through the massive space. "Let us talk about the foundation of your highly successful real estate firm. 25 years ago, my biological father left a massive legal settlement meant exclusively for my care and education. A settlement you legally swore to protect. Did you ever use my money for your own business or personal gain?" Desmond swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He looked at the cameras, then out at the shadows of the studio audience. He adjusted his soaked collar, trying desperately to summon the old arrogant authority he used to wield over me in his study. "No," he said, his voice trembling only slightly. "I built my company from the ground up with my own hands. I never touched a single cent of your money." The studio held its collective breath for 3 agonizing seconds. The examiner watched the jagged green lines spiking violently on his monitor. Then he reached forward and pressed a button on his console. The massive digital screen behind us flashed a blinding brilliant red. The word "lie" appeared in bold white letters, stretching 20 feet across the stage, accompanied by a sharp buzzing sound that made Yvonne flinch. An audible gasp ripped through the live audience. A low murmur of shock and disgust began to ripple through the crowd. Desmond's face drained of all color. He started stuttering, pulling at the wires attached to his chest. "No, wait, that is not right," he stammered, sweat pouring down his forehead. The question was confusing. "I demand you ask it again." But Serena lost whatever tiny shred of sanity she had left. Between the excruciating burning of the fiberglass powder, tearing at her skin, and the sudden, undeniable proof of her father's fraud, broadcasting to the world, she completely snapped. She ripped the sensors off her fingers and jumped up, swaying unsteadily on her designer heels. "This is a setup!" she screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical. She scratched furiously at her collarbone, leaving fresh bleeding marks on her skin. "She is setting us up. The machine is rigged. It is all fake. You are a liar, Nadia. You are just a jealous, bitter liar, trying to destroy our perfect family, because you could never be one of us." She pointed a shaking, raw finger at my face, hyperventilating under the hot lights. "You planned this to humiliate me. None of this is real. My father is a good man. He is a self-made man." I did not raise my voice. I did not argue with her frantic delusions. I simply raised my right hand and snapped my fingers. The heavy soundproof doors at the side of the stage slid open. A tall man in a sharp gray suit walked out into the harsh studio lights, carrying a thick leather binder. Desmond let out a pathetic whimpering sound when he saw him slumping forward in his chair like a man who had just been shot. It was Arthur Pendleton, the senior vice president of their primary offshore bank. I had spent 3 hours in a secure room with Arthur yesterday, convincing him that testifying for me on live television was his only chance to avoid sharing a federal prison cell with Desmond. Arthur walked directly past the trembling family and handed me the heavy binder. I opened it and held up a stack of original bank-stamped wire transfer documents. "These are the authentic, unredacted financial records," I announced to the millions watching at home. "They prove exactly where my stolen settlement money went." It did not just fund Desmond's failing real estate firm. The bulk of it was wired directly into a highly guarded private trust fund. A trust fund that belongs entirely to Serena. Serena stared at the heavy leather binder in absolute terror. The burning fiberglass powder on her skin was momentarily forgotten as she looked at the undeniable proof of her stolen wealth. She stopped scratching and gripped the edges of her chair. She tried to speak, but her throat was completely closed. The entire world was watching her beautiful influencer facade crumble into the reality of a common thief. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, looking for anyone to blame, but there was no one left to protect her. Yvonne saw the empire entirely collapsing. Her husband was caught in a federal lie, and her golden child was exposed as a fraud on live television. Yvonne knew the ship was sinking fast, and she deployed her ultimate weapon. She began to weep. It was a spectacular performance. Yvonne dropped her face into her hands and let out a loud, gut-wrenching sob. Her shoulders shook violently under the harsh studio lights. She grabbed the microphone attached to her collar and looked out at the audience with tears streaming down her carefully lifted face. She was playing the role of her life. "I had to do it, Yvonne," wailed her voice echoing through the massive room. "I had to protect my family. Nadia, you were always so difficult. From the moment you were born, you were impossible to handle. You were always competing with Serena, trying to steal her light. You were so angry and volatile. I took that money to protect my home and to protect my real daughter from your jealousy. I was just a desperate mother trying to keep her family safe from a child who hated us." The performance worked exactly as she intended. A low murmur swept through the studio audience. The crowd was shifting. People inherently want to believe a crying mother. The narrative was blurring the lines of abuse, painting Yvonne as a tragic figure forced to make impossible choices. I could see a few women in the front row looking at her with genuine pity. Yvonne kept sobbing, leaning heavily against her chair, playing the victim perfectly. She buried her face in her hands, letting her shoulders heave with manufactured grief. She thought her tears would save her. She thought the social pressure of a weeping mother would force me to back down and apologize. She thought she could spin her greed into an act of maternal sacrifice. I did not argue with her. I did not defend myself against her desperate accusations. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of emotion. I simply reached forward and pressed a small silver button on the console of my leather chair. The bright studio lights dimmed slightly, and a heavy static crackle echoed through the overhead speakers. The murmur of the audience died down instantly. The static gave way to a grainy audio recording. It was an official dispatch tape from the State Department of Child Protective Services, recorded exactly 25 years ago. The voice of a tired social worker filled the quiet studio. Mrs. Yvonne, the social worker, said through the speakers, "Are you sure you want to surrender this child? She is perfectly healthy." Yvonne stopped crying immediately. The fake tears dried up in an instant, and her face turned the color of ash. Desmond shrank back into his seat, looking like a ghost. Serena froze completely, forgetting the terrible itching on her arms. The clear, chilling voice of a younger Yvonne rang out through the studio speakers, cutting through the air like a knife. "She is a burden." The younger Yvonne said, her tone devoid of any maternal warmth or hesitation. "The other one is easier to mold. Take her." The tape clicked and the heavy static faded into absolute nothingness. Dead silence fell over the entire studio. The audience was completely paralyzed. The pity they had felt just moments before evaporated into pure, unadulterated horror. No one breathed. No one moved. The quiet was so heavy it felt like it could crush the breath right out of the room. The camera operators stood frozen behind their lenses. I sat perfectly still, watching the woman who gave birth to me completely shatter. Her victim card was entirely destroyed. There was no desperate mother narrative left to spin. There was no excuse left to hide behind. There was only the cold, hard truth broadcasting to millions of homes that she had thrown her own flesh and blood away, simply because I was too smart to manipulate. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. The studio audience was too stunned to even whisper. Desmond was staring vacantly at his shoes, while Yvonne seemed to shrink into a hollow shell of a woman. Serena was still scratching at her arms, but even her frantic movements had slowed as the reality of her mother's chilling words finally sunk in. But the heavy quiet was abruptly broken by the sound of a chair scraping violently against the floorboards down in the front row of the VIP section. It was Carter, my esteemed brother-in-law. The rising political star who had married Serena for her inheritance and tied his entire squeaky clean public image to the Wilson family name. He was staring at the stage with wide, panicked eyes. He realized instantly that this sinking ship was going to drag his political career straight down to the bottom of the ocean. He jumped up from his reserved plush seat, nearly knocking over a camera operator in his haste. He was not going to go down with them. He turned toward the live audience and then shouted directly toward the broadcasting cameras, raising his hands up in a frantic gesture of defensive innocence. "I had nothing to do with this," he yelled, his perfectly rehearsed political voice cracking with sheer desperation. "I was conned by these people. These greedy people lied to me. They lied to my face for years. I am a victim of their manipulation just like everyone else here." He turned around and made a dead sprint for the main studio exit, hoping to vanish before the cameras could focus on him. I did not even leave my comfortable leather chair. I simply caught the eye of my head of security standing by the back wall and gave a very subtle nod. Before Carter could even reach the middle aisle, the heavy steel studio doors slammed shut with a deafening metallic thud. The electronic locks engaged, loudly echoing through the quiet room. There was absolutely no escape. Carter froze in his tracks, his chest heaving as he turned slowly back toward the brightly lit stage. "You are not going anywhere, Carter," I said smoothly. my voice projecting clearly through the overhead speakers. Please take your seat. You see, the Wilson family corruption was a disease that infected everyone it touched, and you were a very willing host. I pressed the silver button on my console again. The massive digital screen behind us shifted from the red polygraph graphic to a series of highly detailed bank records. These were not offshore accounts. They were the private ledger sheets for Carter's own youth sports charity. The exact same charity he had used to launch his wholesome political campaign. You did not just marry into the fraud, Carter, I explained, as the main camera zoomed in on his terrified, sweating face. You learned from it. These documents show that over the past 4 years, you systematically embezzled $2 million directly from your own foundation. Money meant for underprivileged children was funneled right into your private campaign accounts. But you were not brave enough to do it under your own name. Were you? I continued, letting the undeniable evidence scroll slowly across the massive screen. You needed a scapegoat just in case the federal authorities ever came knocking at your door, so you forged Serena's signature on every single withdrawal slip. You made your own wife the primary fall guy for your massive theft. Serena stopped scratching. She stared at the massive screen, watching her own perfectly forged signature flash across the digital display. She looked down at Carter, who was now sweating through his expensive tailored suit, shaking his head and backing away toward the locked doors. The ultimate betrayal fractured whatever remained of Serena's mind. The husband, who was supposed to be her partner in elitism, had planned to send her to federal prison just to save his own skin. She let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed all the way up through the studio rafters. Completely ignoring the burning fiberglass powder eating at her skin, Serena vaulted right off the edge of the stage. She moved so fast that my security team did not even have time to intercept her. She lunged at Carter in the middle of the VIP section, grabbing him violently by the lapels of his expensive suit. "You absolute coward!" she shrieked at the top of her lungs. Before he could even raise his hands to defend himself, she slapped him across the face with such vicious force that the sharp crack echoed clearly through every studio microphone. He stumbled backward, tripping over a thick camera cable and crashing hard to the studio floor. Serena stood over him, screaming relentlessly and frantically scratching at her burning arms on live television in front of millions of viewers, as the entire illusion of their perfect lives finally shattered into a million unfixable pieces. Carter lay sprawled across the polished studio floor, gasping for breath and clutching his rapidly bruising cheek. The sharp crack of Serena's hand striking his face still seemed to echo in the cavernous space. The live studio audience was completely frozen in a state of collective shock, unable to process the violent implosion of the perfect political couple unfolding right in front of their eyes. Carter tried to scramble backward like a cornered crab, his expensive tailored suit collecting dust from the floorboards. He was babbling incoherently, muttering that he was innocent, that he was set up by his own wife, that his political career was built on helping the community. But nobody was listening to him anymore. The digital screen looming above the stage displayed every single forged document and illegal wire transfer in high definition. His political life was dead, and he was looking at decades in federal prison. Serena was a terrifying sight. Her emerald green couture gown was torn at the shoulder where her manicured nails had frantically dug into her own flesh. Her neck and arms were covered in angry red welts and bleeding scratches from the industrial itching powder she had originally meant for me. She stood over Carter, trembling with a feral kind of rage that stripped away every ounce of her carefully cultivated elegance. She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving as she glared down at the man who had just tried to throw her into a federal prison cell to save his own political ambitions. She raised her hand to strike him again, but the intense burning sensation on her skin made her flinch. She went back to clawing at her collarbone, letting out small, animalistic noises of pure distress. Her beautiful, flawless influencer brand was literally bleeding out on national television. My security team took a step forward, ready to separate them, but I raised my hand, simply signaling them to hold their positions. I wanted every second of this broadcast exposed to the world. I wanted the cameras to capture the exact moment the Wilson family turned on each other like starved wolves. The camera operators smoothly zoomed in on Carter's pathetic crawling and Serena's unhinged scratching, making sure not a single viewer at home missed the absolute destruction of the Golden Children. Desmond sat in his chair on the stage, staring blankly at the chaotic scene below him. The polygraph wires were still attached to his chest, reading his erratic, elevated heart rate. His entire legacy was ashes. His real estate empire was exposed as a fraudulent shell built on stolen money. His brilliant son-in-law was a documented embezzler. His golden daughter was clawing at her own skin and committing assault on national television. He looked old and hollowed out, completely stripped of the terrifying authority he used to wield over me when I was just a frightened child in his house. Desmond opened his mouth, as if to demand order, as if to try and fix the situation with his booming voice, but no sound came out. He was a broken king, sitting on a throne of lies, and the whole world was watching his kingdom collapse. But Yvonne was not ready to surrender. The sound of her own voice from that 25-year-old Child Protective Services tape was still hanging in the heavy air. The cold, clinical way she had called me a burden and handed me over to the state had completely shattered her desperate mother narrative. She could no longer play the victim. The audience would never pity a woman who threw away a perfectly healthy infant just because she was difficult to control. The viewers who had murmured in sympathy just moments before were now staring at her with undisguised disgust. So Yvonne reverted to her truest nature. If she could not be the victim, she would be the righteous attacker. She pushed herself up from her chair, tearing the polygraph sensors from her skin. Her legs were unsteady, but her eyes were burning with a toxic mixture of hatred and profound humiliation. The heavy television makeup on her face was streaked with genuine tears, but the sorrow had been entirely replaced by a venomous rage. She looked across the stage at me, sitting perfectly composed in my leather chair. The contrast between my absolute calm silence and her frantic destruction pushed her right over the edge of sanity. She pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at my face. Her hand was trembling so violently that the heavy diamond rings on her fingers caught the harsh studio lights and threw scattered bright reflections across the dark room. "Look at what you have done!" she screamed, her voice cracking and echoing through the overhead microphones. "Look at this destruction. You sit there looking so smug, but you are nothing but a destructive force. We gave you life, and you come back into our world just to tear down everything we spent decades building. You set up your own sister. You ruined my husband. You manipulated a federal broadcast just to torture us." The live audience remained dead silent, hanging on every single word. The camera operators smoothly shifted their angles, framing Yvonne's contorted face against the backdrop of the massive digital screen, still displaying Carter's forged embezzlement documents. I did not blink. I did not offer a single word of defense. I just let her talk. I let her show the entire world exactly who she was. I watched the veins pop in her neck as she tried to project all of her guilt onto me. "You are not a normal person," Yvonne shrieked, taking a step closer to me. The polygraph examiner quickly stepped in to block her path, but she ignored him, leaning forward and glaring at me with pure, unadulterated venom. No normal human being could do this to their own family. No normal person could sit there and watch their blood relatives suffer like this without feeling an ounce of guilt. "You have no heart, Nadia. You have no soul." She was hyperventilating now, her chest rising and falling rapidly under the hot stage lights. The beautiful, composed matriarch of the Wilson Empire was gone, completely replaced by a cornered animal lashing out blindly in her final moments. She could not process the fact that she was the architect of her own demise. She needed to believe that I was an anomaly, that I was born flawed and evil. "You are a monster!" Yvonne screamed, her voice reaching a fever pitch of absolute humiliation and rage. "Who taught you to be so cold and ruthless? Who poisoned your mind against your own flesh and blood?" The questions hung in the heavy studio air. They were the desperate, furious demands of a woman trying to find anyone else to blame for the monster sitting across from her. She wanted to believe that someone had broken me, that someone had twisted my mind into this calculating machine of vengeance. She could not accept that her own cold actions 25 years ago had forged the very weapon that was now destroying her entire existence. She wanted a scapegoat. She wanted a villain. I let the silence stretch for a long, deliberate moment. The studio was so quiet, you could hear the heavy breathing of Carter on the floor and the frantic scratching noises coming from Serena. I looked down at Carter still cowering in the aisle. I looked at Serena tearing her skin raw in her ruined emerald dress. I looked at Desmond staring blankly into the dark void of the audience. And finally, I looked right into Yvonne's panicked, tear-streaked eyes. All my life, I had wondered what it would feel like to face the woman who threw me away. I had spent countless nights in tiny, cramped apartments, imagining the anger and the sorrow I would feel. I used to cry myself to sleep, wondering why I was not enough, why my own mother could look at me and see nothing but a burden. I had spent decades building my media empire with this exact moment in mind, hoping that finally destroying her would fill the empty hole in my chest. But in this moment, looking at her pathetic, desperate rage, I felt absolutely nothing. No sorrow, no anger, no longing for a mother I never had. She was just a stranger. A selfish, greedy stranger who had lost her favorite game. I was completely free. I let a smile touch my lips. It started small, lifting the corners of my mouth, and then grew into the brightest, most genuine smile of the entire evening. It was not a smirk or a manufactured television expression. It was a smile of pure, authentic peace. The heavy burden of the Wilson family name had finally been lifted off my shoulders. "I have been waiting for you to ask that, Mom," I said, my voice soft, but carrying perfectly through the silent studio. I watched the confusion ripple across Yvonne's face. She had expected me to yell back. She had expected me to list her crimes or defend my humanity. She had expected me to cry and beg for an explanation. She had not expected a calm, genuine smile. She took a small step backward, suddenly looking very small and very afraid. "Of course," I said, leaning forward in my chair and gesturing gracefully toward the heavy soundproof doors at the far end of the stage. "Meet the woman who raised me." Carter lay sprawled across the polished studio floor, gasping for breath and clutching his rapidly bruising cheek. The sharp crack of Serena's hand striking his face still seemed to echo in the cavernous space. The live studio audience was completely frozen in a state of collective shock, unable to process the violent implosion of the perfect political couple unfolding right in front of their eyes. Carter tried to scramble backward like a cornered animal, his expensive tailored suit collecting dust from the floorboards. He was babbling incoherently, muttering that he was innocent, that he was set up by his own wife, but nobody was listening to him anymore. The digital screen looming above the stage displayed every single forged document and illegal wire transfer in high definition. His political life was dead, and he was looking at decades in federal prison. Serena was a terrifying sight. Her emerald green couture gown was torn at the shoulder where her manicured nails had frantically dug into her own flesh. Her neck and arms were covered in angry red welts and bleeding scratches from the industrial itching powder she had originally meant for me. She stood over Carter, trembling with a feral kind of rage that stripped away every ounce of her carefully cultivated elegance. She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving as she glared down at the man who had just tried to throw her into a federal prison cell to save his own political ambitions. The ultimate betrayal had fractured whatever remained of her mind. Desmond sat in his chair on the stage, staring blankly at the chaotic scene below him. The polygraph wires were still attached to his chest, reading his erratic, elevated heart rate. His entire legacy was ashes. His real estate empire was exposed as a fraudulent shell built on stolen money. His brilliant son-in-law was a documented embezzler. His golden daughter was clawing at her own skin and committing assault on national television. He looked old and hollowed out, completely stripped of the terrifying authority he used to wield over me when I was just a frightened child in his house. But Yvonne could not take the silence. She could not sit there and watch her entire dynasty burn to the ground without a fight. The absolute humiliation of the broadcast was too much for her fragile, arrogant ego to bear. Seeing her perfect family physically and emotionally destroyed on live television pushed her right over the edge of sanity. She pushed herself up from her chair, her legs trembling as she looked across the stage at me. I was sitting perfectly still, watching the destruction with absolute calm. The contrast between my peaceful silence and her frantic, ruined life was the final trigger. Yvonne grabbed a crystal water glass from the small table next to her chair, holding it tightly to keep her hands from shaking. Her heavy television makeup was streaked with sweat and tears, but the sorrow had been entirely replaced by a venomous, blistering rage. She took a step toward me and pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at my face. "You are a monster!" Yvonne screamed, her voice cracking and echoing through the overhead microphones with a shrill, terrifying volume. "You are a monster. Who taught you to be so cold and ruthless? Who poisoned your mind against your own flesh and blood?" She was hyperventilating now, her chest rising and falling rapidly under the hot stage lights. She needed to believe that I was an anomaly, that I was born flawed and evil. She could not accept that her own cold actions 25 years ago had forged the very weapon that was now destroying her existence. She wanted a scapegoat. She wanted a villain to blame for her own monstrous mistakes. I let the silence stretch for a long, deliberate moment. The studio was so quiet you could hear the heavy breathing of Carter on the floor and the frantic scratching noises coming from Serena. I looked right into Yvonne's panicked, tear-streaked eyes. All my life I had wondered what it would feel like to face the woman who threw me away. I had spent decades building my media empire with this exact moment in mind. But looking at her pathetic, desperate rage, I felt absolutely nothing. She was just a stranger. A selfish, greedy stranger who had finally lost her favorite game. I was completely free. I let a smile touch my lips. It started small, lifting the corners of my mouth, and then grew into the brightest, most genuine smile of the entire broadcast. It was not a smirk or a manufactured television expression. It was a smile of pure, authentic peace. The heavy burden of the Wilson family name had finally been lifted off my shoulders. "I have been waiting for you to ask that, Mom," I said, my voice soft, but carrying perfectly through the silent studio. "Of course. Meet the woman who raised me." I raised my hand and gave a subtle signal. The heavy soundproof doors at the back of the stage slid open with a deep mechanical hiss that seemed to suck all the remaining air out of the massive room. Every camera on the broadcasting floor instantly pivoted away from the pathetic wreckage of the Wilson family to focus squarely on the dark entryway. Out of the shadows stepped a woman who commanded the absolute attention of every single person in the studio. It was Gloria. She walked down the center aisle with a slow, deliberate grace that radiated pure, unadulterated authority. She wore a flawlessly tailored navy blue blazer, her silver hair pulled back into an elegant and sophisticated knot. She did not rush, and she did not look intimidated by the millions of people watching her through the broadcast lenses. Pinned directly to the lapel of her tailored jacket, catching the harsh, brilliant glare of the studio spotlights, was her shiny Child Protective Services badge. It was the exact same silver badge she had worn 25 years ago, when she walked into the Wilson mansion to collect unwanted baggage. Unlike the frantic, sweating mess of the Golden family currently falling apart on my stage, Gloria looked like a queen stepping onto her rightful throne. Her face was perfectly calm, her posture rigid and proud. She did not spare a single glance for Carter or Serena. She kept her sharp, intelligent eyes fixed entirely on the woman standing across the stage from me. The live audience parted for her in complete stunned silence, leaning back in their seats as if making way for royalty. The only sound in the massive broadcasting room was the steady, confident click of Gloria's heels against the polished floorboards. Yvonne was still standing by her chair holding the crystal water glass. She watched Gloria emerge from the shadows and step fully into the bright white light of the main stage. Suddenly, Yvonne's eyes bulged out of her skull. The remaining color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a hollowed-out corpse. 25 years is a very long time, but guilt has a unique way of preserving certain faces perfectly in your memory. Yvonne instantly recognized the sharp, calculating eyes and the unyielding, proud posture of the woman standing before her. It was the exact same face of the social worker she had callously handed the state surrender papers to all those decades ago. The woman who had looked at her with quiet, suppressed disgust as she signed away her perfectly healthy infant daughter. the woman she thought she had dismissed as just another nameless, faceless government employee, hired to clean up a rich family's messy mistakes. The catastrophic realization hit Yvonne with the destructive force of a freight train. Her entire body seized in absolute terror. Her fingers went completely numb, losing all feeling. The heavy crystal water glass slipped right out of her trembling hand. It fell through the dead silent air in agonizing slow motion and hit the hard wooden stage floor, shattering into 100 glittering sharp pieces. The loud crack of breaking glass echoed like a gunshot through the sensitive studio microphones, making Desmond flinch violently in his seat. Cold water pooled around Yvonne's expensive designer shoes, soaking into the delicate hem of her custom dress, but she did not even blink. She just stared at Gloria with a look of absolute paralyzed horror. That is her, Yvonne stammered, her voice a broken, raspy sound that barely registered over her lapel microphone. Gloria did not stop walking until she reached the very center of the brightly lit stage. She stood right beside my leather chair, resting one warm, deeply reassuring hand on my shoulder. The physical touch grounded me instantly, sending a wave of absolute peace and profound victory through my entire body. This was my real mother, the woman who had taken a discarded, broken piece of the Wilson family and carefully molded her into a media titan capable of taking down an entire corrupt dynasty. Gloria looked down at the shattered glass pooling at Yvonne's feet, and then looked directly into Yvonne's terrified, bulging eyes. The studio audience was entirely mesmerized. People were leaning so far forward in their seats that they were practically falling out of them, holding their breath and remaining completely captivated by the raw, unscripted psychological destruction unfolding before them. The live feed comments on social media were exploding at a record-breaking pace, but the studio itself remained wrapped in a thick, dead silence. Gloria slowly stepped away from my chair and moved gracefully toward the center stage microphone stand. The spotlight shifted seamlessly following her elegant, upright form. She adjusted the microphone with steady, practiced hands, taking a moment to look out at the sea of faces in the dark audience before turning her attention back to the ruined family. She did not look angry or bitter. She looked completely and utterly victorious. She leveled her unwavering gaze at Yvonne, who was visibly shaking. Now her perfect, arrogant facade entirely melted away into pure, pathetic panic. "Yes, Yvonne," Gloria said, her voice incredibly smooth and powerful, echoing clearly through the massive studio speakers. "You told me she was the difficult one, but to me, she was the diamond you threw away. And as a former lead investigator, I have kept the original files of your crimes for 25 years. Yvonne stared at Gloria as the absolute finality of her words sank in. She had nowhere left to run and no lies left to spin. Before she could even open her mouth to stammer another pathetic excuse, a high-pitched wailing sound pierced through the heavy studio walls. The distant sound of police sirens was growing rapidly louder, echoing through the city streets and converging directly on our broadcasting building. The heavy steel doors at the back of the studio burst open again. This time it was not a single social worker stepping into the light. A swarm of federal agents in dark windbreakers stormed down the center aisle. FBI agents and financial crimes unit officers fanned out across the studio floor, moving with swift tactical precision. The flashing red and blue lights from the squad cars outside cast a frantic strobe effect through the high studio windows, painting the terrified faces of the Wilson family in harsh, alternating colors. A tall, stern-looking FBI agent stepped onto the stage and walked straight toward Desmond. He did not read him his rights with any sense of theatrical flair. He simply grabbed the real estate mogul's arms, pulled them roughly behind his back, and secured the cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. Desmond Wilson, the man who had built an empire on intimidation and stolen funds, was formally arrested for massive corporate fraud, grand embezzlement, and decades of perjury. He looked like a deflated balloon as they marched him away, his head hanging in total defeat. Yvonne tried to back away, her high heels slipping on the wet floor where her water glass had shattered. An agent caught her by the arm, turning her around. She began to weep hysterically, pleading that she was a mother, that she was a respected philanthropist. But the cold, metallic snap of the handcuffs silenced her. She was being dragged away for the exact same crimes as her husband, her perfect public image entirely dismantled on national television. Down on the studio floor, Carter was hauled to his feet by two financial crimes officers. They read him his charges for tax evasion and international money laundering as they marched him toward the exit. He kept looking back at the cameras, shaking his head and crying like a spoiled child. Serena was left completely alone on the floor. The itching powder had ravaged her skin, and the reality of her shattered life finally caused her legs to give out. She collapsed onto the floorboards, sobbing uncontrollably. She crawled toward the edge of the stage, looking up at me with mascara streaming down her ruined face. "Nadia, please," she begged, her voice a pathetic whine. "Please, you are my sister. You have to stop this. Show some mercy." I stood up from my leather chair and walked slowly over to the main podium. I looked down at the people who shared my blood as they were dragged away by federal authorities. I felt no need to offer any tearful goodbyes or emotional cliches about forgiveness and family. They had made their choices 25 years ago, and today was simply the collection of their debts. I looked past Serena's reaching hands and turned my gaze directly to the main broadcasting camera. My voice was steady, clear, and echoing with absolute power as I delivered my final words to the millions of people watching at home. "The truth can never be thrown away," I said smoothly. "Good night, America." The massive studio lights snapped off, fading the entire stage to a deep, silent black. The most powerful takeaway from this story is that your true worth is never defined by those who repeatedly tear you down, even if they share your blood. Genuine security and peace come from establishing your own independence, trusting your capabilities, and building a life entirely on your own terms. Sometimes the most profound act of self-love is walking away from a toxic environment and refusing to seek validation from people committed to misunderstanding you. Ultimately, the best revenge is not destruction but living a successful, authentic, and unapologetic life. Have you ever had to draw a difficult boundary with toxic relatives to protect your own peace? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more empowering journeys of self-discovery.